How do I manage overwhelming feelings of anxiety after a hurtful or abusive relationship with a narcissistic person? My name's Ruthann. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm an expert in relationships and issues of narcissism, and this is the most requested video on this channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about how you can manage difficult feelings of anxiety and overwhelm after a relationship with a narcissist, and also why relationships with narcissistic people can provoke so much anxiety that stays even after the relationship has ended. It might be helpful to start with understanding narcissistic people's relationship with anxiety. Typically, narcissistic people in childhood have experienced a lot of neglect and abuse. Their own anxiety is not responded to with tenderness, love, compassion, kindness, and protection. Often they've been left to cope with their own anxiety by themselves, and they've learned to become autonomous and to cut themselves off from that kind of vulnerability or neediness. They may also have had their anxiety responded to with humiliation, with bullying, with punishment. And so they may adopt a very punitive and punishing stance towards their own anxiety and also anxiety in those close to them. They may become very detached if you feel anxious, or even become critical, condescending, or punitive. And it's certainly unlikely that a highly narcissistic person will be able to respond to you with the kind of empathy and compassion that you truly need. So when you're in a long, close relationship with a narcissistic person, you too may learn to view your anxiety with contempt, with irritation, to cut yourself off from it, to view it as a source of annoyance and irritation, or even a reason for criticism, humiliation, and condemnation. Now, this video was requested by some of you who have been in hurtful and abusive relationships with narcissistic people, but I'd like to let you in on a little secret. This video is equally relevant to people who are struggling with their own pathological narcissism. So I hope you'll listen in and consider taking some of this on board too. Anxiety and vulnerability are core parts of being human. It's just who we are. And if you've been in a long-standing relationship with someone who has responded to you with neglect, contempt, or punishment, you can come to view that very precious, ordinary, vulnerable, anxious part of you with irritation and contempt. You may want to push away that part of you, keep it at bay. You may get angry with it, frustrated with it, telling it off, punishing it, trying to get rid of it. When I'm working with someone whose anxiety stems from long-standing interpersonal trauma, it's very helpful to understand what is it that they do to cope with anxiety when it's triggered. Do you cut off from your anxiety, detaching from it, trying to get away from it? Do you become irritated, frustrated with it, trying to tell it to go away? Do you try to rationalize it away and talk to yourself like you're being stupid or invalidate your feelings? And what's very helpful is to catch the moment that that coping strategy begins. Because when you can catch the moment that you're going into what I would call a coping mode, whether that's a coping mode of being a detached protector, cutting off from those feelings, or a coping mode of being punitive and trying to punish those feelings to get rid of them. Whatever that coping mode is, it's very helpful to understand the moment at which you're going into that mode. Because when you can see that, that gives you a moment of opportunity to choose a different path. Now, there's really no way around this. If you have an anxious child, well, you're going to have to give that anxious child some attention. And so there's no way to learn how to cope with this anxiety without approaching it with an attitude of kindness, compassion, and curiosity. This may be difficult if it's not an experience you've ever had before, or if it's been a long time since you've had that experience, particularly if you immediately associate anxiety with feelings of neglect, humiliation, or punishment. So go slow, be gentle, and expect this to take some time. Something I suggest to people in therapy is that they find a photograph of themselves when they were small, and they look at that photo. And they try to think about that anxious part of them as being an anxious, vulnerable child, like this little child in the photo, this little child who can't really think for themselves, who isn't able to be strong, who needs safety, protection, security, love, tenderness, compassion, empathy, and relaxation and fun. And by really exploring those feelings and really tuning into that underlying anxious or vulnerable child, you can begin to identify what are the needs that haven't been met. And as you identify those unmet needs, perhaps a need for safety, for protection, for tenderness, for softness, for relaxation, whatever the need is, you can begin to intentionally take baby steps in the direction of meeting that unmet need. And this can play out in very practical ways. It may be as simple as saying, you know what, I need sleep, I need rest, I need relaxation, I need time with people who I enjoy being with, who are kind and nurturing and friendly towards me. It may be making time for those things. It may also be approaching your everyday activities with an attitude of kindness and care. So when you brush your teeth, or you have a shower, or you're getting dressed, or you're eating, or you're sleeping, whatever your activities are, if you can do them with an attitude of gentleness, self-respect, and self-compassion, it can really be a way of setting up an intention of nurturing and being committed to your anxious and vulnerable self, helping them to feel safer and more secure in the world. And this is really about the attitude that you take to yourself. And part of this is going to need to be nurturing a soft, soothing, and comforting voice. And this is really about the relationship that you have with yourself. And so it's really important to develop a soft, soothing, compassionate voice. You can practice talking to that photo of the little you, or you can even put your hand on your heart, take your own hand, hold yourself physically with gentleness and care. You can begin to talk to yourself, identifying the emotions that you feel. And you can do that either by talking to yourself like you feel anxious, you feel overwhelmed, you feel scared, you feel intimidated, you feel alone, you feel abandoned. Or you can talk to yourself in that way. I feel alone, I feel abandoned, I feel anxious, I'm scared. But naming the emotion with a gentle, compassionate tone, beginning to soften yourself towards that emotion, allowing yourself to feel it. And this may require some time. It may require a kind of gradual, step-by-step approach. It may not be something you can take on all at once. And if that's the case, it is so important not to beat yourself up for that, but instead to really recognize the compassion and the patience and the commitment that you need to have. Now, this might sound all very soft and fluffy, but part of this is also about strength, protection, and commitment. As you put your arm around that little anxious, vulnerable you will allow them to grow in confidence. You will allow them to begin to feel safer in the world. You'll be able to let them know that it's okay to take risks and do things that might be scary if they're in your best interests. You can take the risks of trying new things, even failing from time to time, because you know you have your own back. So being compassionate to yourself doesn't mean avoiding ever feeling anxious. It actually means having the courage to allow yourself to feel anxious and to really help yourself understand that you are deeply committed to yourself, that you are wise, that you're going to protect yourself, that you're going to really take care of you, because that actually allows your inner vulnerable, anxious child to strengthen, to have the courage to have adventures, to have fun, and to relax and be more at ease in the world. Now, that is a lengthy process. It takes time. And so you may need to be very, very patient with yourself as you get there. This is very difficult for some people. If you have a harsh inner critic, if you're very punitive towards yourself, if you're used to speaking to yourself with harshness, if there's a part of you that's quite disgusted and contemptuous towards your anxiety, that's going to be really difficult. And you can see my other video on making peace with your inner critic. I'll put a link at the end, and I'll also put a link in the description. It may be very helpful for you to work with a therapist who can give you the experience of being held, of being nurtured, of being cared about. And that may be a really important part of the healing process for you. And as you navigate a harsh and punitive, contemptuous inner critic, it's really important to be patient with yourself, to understand how painful and how challenging this is for you, and to have compassion for your suffering. So don't beat yourself up for finding it difficult to do this. Have patience with yourself and really commit to nurturing a compassionate stance towards your inner anxious and vulnerable self. And if that's uncomfortable, that's okay. Because it makes sense that you would be afraid of this kind of vulnerability because you haven't experienced it before, or because if you have, when you've allowed yourself to depend on someone, or you've looked to someone, they've treated you with harshness or punitiveness or neglect, of course you're anxious about feeling these kinds of feelings. Any psychological therapy for anxiety is anxiety provoking. The way to overcome phobias and fears is to approach the thing that we're afraid of. And so if you are overwhelmed by your anxiety, if you're overwhelmed by learning how to be kind and caring and compassionate for yourself, The way to get comfortable with that is to allow yourself to feel uncomfortable, to patiently allow yourself to be committed to this process, even though it's probably going to generate some very difficult and uncomfortable feelings for you. It's going to take time for you to learn that feelings of anxiety, of vulnerability, of compassion and care are not to be feared. And your inner anxious, vulnerable child needs you to be committed to show up with protection, strength, persistence, and determination. So I really hope that you do commit yourself to your inner anxious child, to being their protector, their comforter, their soother, the one who will really take good care of them. And if you do, you may also be surprised that your capacity to be there not only for yourself, but for other people, to not be overwhelmed by their anxiety, to not see it as an irritation or want to cut off from it, you may find that you actually grow in your empathy for other people. And you may find that you're able to be more tolerant, empathic, compassionate, and caring towards the people who are important to you. I'd love to hear what you think, so leave a comment, hit the like button, subscribe or follow if you'd like to hear more from me. I look forward to seeing you next time. In the meantime, take good care.